Good morning, everyone. Want to just give a couple disclaimers before we start here. First of all, I'm not suggesting, I'm going to share with you this morning a method of agriculture, I guess you would call it that I'm excited about, but I'm not in any way suggesting that it's the only way or even the best way. And let me see here. I'm technologically challenged. Zach, okay, there we go. So that's the first thing. I'm throwing this out there, and I hope my desire is that it will be encouraging to you and challenging and energizing to you. But there are other methods. And if you already have land and you have tractors and equipment, then go for it, you know. We actually, on our farm, we kind of are doing two systems at the same time. We're doing small, intensive growing on our hoop house pads, and then we are also doing field work with tractors. And so they both work, but I think this has potential for a lot of you. The second disclaimer I want to make is just that if you're here because you're wanting to just improve your home garden, I think you can gain ideas and inspiration from this, but this is really geared for those of you, and I've talked to quite a number of you who are interested in possibly doing this on a bigger scale, interested in maybe doing this as a living. And so this is geared for you, and also it could be for institutions that are wanting to follow the counsels on agriculture. So with those disclaimers, I want to get into the subject, and I hope that this is going to be as practical as possible, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a few questions. Okay. Unfortunately, the pictures just are not showing up well here, so we actually cut out a lot of pictures, which is unfortunate, but there's no point in you seeing stuff that you're really not seeing. Anyone interested in beginning farming faces often overwhelming challenges, and I know some of you are there. It's like, how do I start? Finding and purchasing land is a huge hurdle for many people, especially if you don't have the resources. And honestly, we didn't have the resources when we started out. If it wasn't for the fact that my parents had the land, we couldn't have done it. So the Lord has to give some breaks to those of us who don't have everything we need here. But that's a huge thing, you know, finding and purchasing it. And then once you have the land, what about all the tools and equipment? Especially if you're thinking about tractors and tractor equipment, it's thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. And then there's all the infrastructure. Not only do you need a place to wash your produce and pack it, but you need a greenhouse for starting your plants. You need ideally maybe some hoop houses as well. And of course an irrigation system. You know, in this day and age of climate change, you really want to be able to irrigate when necessary. And so all of those things can just be overwhelming to people starting out. Then, assuming you make it through all those challenges, you've got to actually make it work. You know, you can have the best infrastructure and all the land and equipment, but you've got to make it work. You've got to decide what to grow and when to grow it, when to plant it. find the markets for your produce. If you're trying to earn money doing this, again, you can grow the most beautiful produce, but you've got to sell it. You've got to actually produce the goods. You know, you can have the market, but you got to have the goods. You've got to stay on top of the workload, which at certain times of year is quite overwhelming. And then you've got to make it sustainable, both economically. If you're going to keep doing this, you've got to be earning enough money to sustain it. But physically, you know, you've got to be able to manage the workload and not be totally drained. And emotionally, it needs to be, you know, we've talked about all the kind of the theory of agriculture and true education. And we believe, because it's God's plan, that it ought to be life-giving, right? But if you're not careful, it can be life-draining. And that's not a good thing. And then, as Adventists, I believe we're called even higher. Look at this quote. He who tills the soil is to make his work an object lesson of the careful, thorough work which must be done in the culture of the soil of the heart. Isn't that incredible? So when people come to your garden, when they come to your farm, are they seeing what God wants to do to their heart? And if they're not, we're missing out on a tremendous opportunity to witness through our garden. Do we want weeds in our heart? Do we want disorder and chaos? No. And the reality is, you know, we want to be honest here. That's a high calling, and that's hard to do when you're just struggling to keep your head above water. You know, when spring has come and everything's growing and it's raining and you can't get out there and cultivate like you want to, and you've got plants that got to get in the ground and on. It's a challenge. Is there a solution? Well, I'd like to throw something out there this morning that I think can be a big part of the solution. This is not any silver bullet that's going to solve all the challenges. But there's a quote I really like from a 19th century Parisian market gardener: "Always tend the smallest amount of land possible, but tend it exceptionally well." You know, we live in America, and the American idea of farming is get big or get out. You know, you want to do more and more, right? Because you want to earn more and more, and it's a trap. But I really like this: always tend the smallest amount of land possible, but tend it exceptionally well. Now, I want to share this quote. This, I think, has real implications for us in what we're talking about here. Instead of rendering to God the means he has placed in their hands, many invest it in more land, getting bigger. This evil is growing with our brethren. They had before all they could well care for, but the love of money or a desire to be counted as well off as their neighbors leads them to bury their means in the world and withhold from God his just dues. Can we be surprised if they are not prospered, if God does not bless their crops and they are disappointed? Could our brethren remember that God can bless 20 acres of land and make them as productive as 100? They would not continue to bury themselves in lands, but would let their means flow into God's treasury. Take heed, said Christ, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life. Satan is pleased to have you increase your farms and invest your means in worldly enterprises, For by so doing, you not only hinder the cause from advancing, but by anxiety and overwork, lessen your prospect for eternal life. So here we want to do agriculture because we know that's God's plan. But if we're not careful, we can increase our anxiety and overwork and actually lessen our prospect for eternal life. So I think the key in this is to try to figure out how much we can actually handle and do it the way we believe God wants us to do it, and then trust Him that He will make it produce. I mean, I don't think we should go by any hard and fast rules here, but she says 20 acres can produce as much as 100, so that's a ratio of 1 to 5 basically, right? So 1 acre could produce as much as 5 acres. Now, in small farming, 5 acres is a lot of land. You can grow a lot of produce on 5 acres. I'll just tell you, for us, we're earning our income in the summer months off of about 3.5 acres. Actually, I think it's a little less than that, maybe 3 acres. And we'd like to cut back. What I'm sharing with you, I'm really pondering in my heart myself. We would like to do less and do it better. Are you all familiar with Eliot Coleman? Eliot Coleman is probably, well, I shouldn't say probably, I think I can say he is the most well-known market gardener in the U.S. today. He's written 3 books, which I highly recommend. He's not a Christian, unfortunately, but I believe his methods are very compatible with Christianity and with our beliefs as Adventists. In his latest book, The Winter Harvest Handbook, he has a chapter talking about the Parisian market gardeners. It's the second chapter in the book, Historical Inspiration. And it's a fascinating history to look at. But the market gardens of Paris, and we're talking about particularly in the last half of the 19th century, were a model of efficiency and productivity. Not only were these gardens supplying all of Paris with their food supply, but they were actually exporting their produce to England and other places, all in these very small. They average 1 to 2 acres in size. They were extremely intensively cultivated. 4 to 8 harvests per year from the same piece of ground. How many harvests do you get from your garden every year? If you're only getting 1 harvest from a certain piece of ground, you're not farming very intensively. 4 to 8 harvests per square foot. And here's just a simple example. In early spring, they would sow carrot and radish seeds in an area, and at the same time, they'd transplant lettuce. The carrots and radishes would germinate and start to grow, and of course, radishes grow very fast. And so in 21 days or something, they would harvest their radishes. The carrots are just growing slowly. The lettuce is growing, and the lettuce grows pretty fast, so they'd harvest the lettuce, and that gave room and light for the carrots to grow up. But where the lettuces were, they would transplant in cauliflower, and the carrots would finish maturing around the cauliflower. They'd harvest the carrots, and then the cauliflower had room to mature. They'd harvest the cauliflower and work the ground, and then they'd plant their summer crops. So incredibly intensive planting. You know, some people would call that companion planting, succession planting, all of that. Their garden system was powered by at least 100 and sometimes up to 400 tons of horse manure per acre. This was an incredibly tight circle that worked. They would take their wagons filled with produce to market, and then they would fill those wagons with manure and the bedding, the straw bedding from all the stables, because of course in the late 1800s, horses were a means of transportation, so they would fill those wagons with the horse manure and take them back and power their farms with it. And not only was it powering the fertility of the farm, but it was providing heat. They would use them for hotbeds and in cold frames to, you know, as the manure broke down, it produced heat, and incredibly productive systems. And the amazing thing was, even though they were farming so intensively, the soil productivity continued to increase, even though they're taking off 4 to 8 crops per year. And one person was quoted as saying, "One does not see pest problems in Parisian market gardens wherever copious compost use and rational crop rotations are practiced by growers." They had one worker per quarter acre, very intensive. And they they wanted to maximize their space, so they only had 10-inch pathways, only wide enough to walk. They didn't even use wheelbarrows or anything. They had these wicker baskets that they would wear on their backs that had a thing that came up over the head. They would fill those with compost and go along the path and then lean over and dump the compost on the beds that way. They really had it down to a science. Well, unfortunately, we say unfortunately, sometimes progress doesn't seem like progress, but when vehicles came along, of course, the system kind of disintegrated. And then the other thing was the rising costs of land in Paris. You know, at some point, you can't afford to pay the taxes for a farm in metropolitan Paris. But just a fascinating sidelight. So this was in the late 1800s. There were a few market gardeners that continued in the outskirts of Paris. And Eliot Coleman, I think it was in the 70s, went to Europe and was inspired by these market gardeners that were left. And he came back to the U.S. and started developing his system based on what he'd learned from the French. Now, I'm going to tell you in a little bit about another person, Jean-Martin Fortier, who's up in Quebec. He learned from Eliot Coleman. He's a French-Canadian. He wrote a book recently, and it caught on like wildfire in the French-speaking population of the world. And they're asking him, come over to France and teach us how to do this. And so he has been over to France a number of times, and Eliot Coleman was just over there with him, reteaching the French what they taught them. Isn't that amazing how it goes? We are so quick to forget. So the question is, could that kind of farm model work today? Well, let me tell you about our visit. We had the privilege, our marketing season officially ended the middle of September, and the day after our last market, we got in our car and headed up to New England and visited some farms up there. It was a vacation slash business trip. We were wanting to learn from some of the best up there. So we went up to Quebec to Jean-Martin Fortier's farm. And Zach, can you just hand me that book, please? Does anyone speak French here? Okay. This book is yours if you want it. He gave this to me. This is his book, La Jardin Maraîcher. Is that how you say it? Marché. Marché. Yeah, well, you can see, I have loved looking through this book. Well, just after the meeting. I have learned French. Just I can't pronounce it, but I can understand some of it. Just so I could figure out what this book is saying. This is really inspiring to me. Now the good news is, this is coming out in English within the next month. The Market Gardener, I think, is what it's called in English. Jean-Martin farms an acre and a half in Quebec. He's got 180 100-foot-long, 30-inch wide beds. A 30-inch wide bed is kind of the standard. It's become the standard for small growers. And I would say the main reason for that is because of the influence of Eliot Coleman. Secondly, because they have developed a number of tools particularly suited to the 30-inch wide bed. So anyway, Jean-Martin is following that model, 180 100-foot-long beds. Last year, he grossed $140,000 off an acre and a half. This year, he told us it's going to be more. Yeah, it's actually on a slide later on. What is his net? I didn't ask him that, but what I can tell you is that he has 4 what he calls full-time workers, but 2 of them are for the growing season, I would say 8 or 9 months, and then the other 2 are he and his wife. And one of the beauty of these small farms is your expenses are much lower because you don't have the big equipment and everything. So, well, yeah. So with labor, I'm sure that's taking up at least 50%, maybe a little more. So anyway, I have a few pictures of his farm. Again, we didn't take many. I mean, I didn't put many in here because it's hard to see them. But you can see just very intensively planted. Now, one thing he did, Eliot Coleman uses a 12-inch wide pathway. Jean-Martin widened it a little bit to 18 inches. But still, you can pack a lot in a 100-foot-long bed. Now, this is one thing that I found very fascinating. When am I supposed to stop? 9:45. Okay. You know, one challenge I've had when I'm trying to help small market or home gardeners is to figure out what to do with cover crops. You know, on a larger scale, if you have tractors and stuff, you can flail mow it or spade it under. We have what's called a reciprocating spader. That's a wonderful machine, but very expensive and not even in the realm of possibility for a home gardener. So what do? You want to grow cover crops to be improving the soil, but what do you do with it? How do you get the cover crop in the soil? Even a rototiller, it's not easy. If you've got a cover crop this tall, you know. So what Jean Martin does, he has no tractor except for what's called a walking tractor. Do all of you know what I mean by a BCS? That's the most popular model that's available in the U.S. here. Most of you would look at it and say, oh, that's a rototiller, but it's much more than a rototiller. The handlebars can be turned so you can have either a front-mounted implement or a rear-mounted implement, and there's all kinds of implements available. It's a very heavy-duty, well-built machine, and it's what Elliot and Jean Martin would recommend for a small farm. It's all you need. The brand name that's most readily available is BCS. They're all made in Italy. So, you know, that makes them a little pricier. But again, they're very well made, very heavy duty. BCS is the name of the company. Two-wheel tractor, that's maybe the term that's used. Two-wheel tractor, walking tractor, yes.
An old model would be a Gravely.
Yes, there was an American company, well, I think it was an American company years ago that built the Gravely, which has the same concept. And some people can still find them. You know, if you can find a Gravely with implements, it's a good option. Oh, my small engine expert wouldn't recommend it. So you can talk to him about that afterwards. Anyway, what Jean Martin does when he grows a cover crop is he has a flail mower mounted on his BCS. You know what a flail mower is? It has a spinning drum with teeth on it. And so it spins this way and chops your cover crop or whatever you're mowing in small pieces. So that's one benefit of it. It chops it in small pieces, but secondly, it just drops it right there. Whereas if you use a bush hog or any kind of rotary mower, it pushes to the side and ends up giving you these windrows, so you may have none of your organic matter in a large part of it, and then you have these big clumps of it. So that's the beauty of a flail mower. It chops it and leaves it right there. So we actually have one too. We have I think it's a 30-inch wide flail mower. So he just runs up and down his beds with the flail mower. And then, this is the neat part, he has this heavy-duty tarp. He just covers the ground with this tarp. It's black, it's white on one side, black on the other, covers it and sandbags it down and leaves it for a few weeks. And when he pulls it off, can you see that? He pulled the tarp back, and I mean, there were the healthiest worms I think I've ever seen. And the ground is soft and friable and ready to work. It's just crummy. It's beautiful. Nature did all the work. He just covered it up and let the worms and microbes and all of that break down the material, and his beds were ready to work. So I was excited about that, especially for home gardeners. You know, this is a wonderful way to deal with your cover crop. Of course, how long you're going to have to tarp it depends on the time of the year, among other things. You know, how biologically active the soil is. But it's working well. I was going to say something else about that, but it slipped my mind. So We may come back to that. Another thing he's using is what we call caterpillar tunnels, very low-cost hoop house structures that are the reason it's called a caterpillar tunnel is that there's ropes over top of it that kind of gives it the look of a caterpillar. The ropes are tied tight enough that it holds the plastic down, and when the weather warms up, you just pull the plastic up, and the friction of the rope holds it up. So it's a very low-cost way of covering things. Let me go back and just say, well, I don't have a good picture of it, but another unique thing that he does in his pathways, his 18-inch wide pathways, what he often does is he will shovel the pathway out a little bit and put that dirt on his bed, so there's a little bit of a raised bed effect. But then what he does in his pathways is use what's called ramial wood chips. Have any of you heard that term? Apparently, I've done a little research on it. Apparently, up in Quebec, the universities have done quite a bit of research on this, and it's wood chips from wood that's smaller than about 3 inches in diameter. And so, you know, I'm not a biologist, but I guess it has more of the cambium layers of bark, and it's more easily broken down and more beneficial to the soil, apparently. So he mulches his pathways with these ramial wood chips, and then the next year, after they've had a year of breaking down and colonizing the soil with fungus and so on, he puts that on the beds, and that's part of his fertility. In addition to that, he uses, as they said of the Parisian market gardeners, copious quantities of compost. He was using about 70 tons per acre. And he buys it. You know, a small farm like that, that's more compost than you can imagine making. We buy compost. It's hard to have enough compost. His tomato hoop house he had the most beautiful tomatoes, most beautiful plants I have ever seen. Yeah. You wouldn't know from the pictures, but one thing, just to a plug for the DVDs, I guess they're actually getting the PowerPoint presentations, so the pictures should show up much better on the DVD. That's the hope. Anyway, one hoop house, it was 30 feet wide by 96 feet long. He said they were bringing out 1,000 pounds of tomatoes a week off of that hoop house. And yeah. And one other picture here I just showed. This is his cucumber house. And even I was a little surprised up in Quebec that he still has bug problems. You know, for the most part, the more north you go, the less bug issues you have. But he was having real challenges with cucumber beetles. And, you know, I think we have to balance all of this. You know, the theory, and I believe the reality is that the healthier the soil, the less bug problems you're going to have. But let's balance that with the fact that we're living in the last days and the earth is waxing old, and I think we just have to realize that some insect problems are a part of this sinful world, and I think it's probably unrealistic to think that we're going to get away from that totally by healthy soil alone. So what he did is screened this hoop house, And I'm going to do the same thing with ours where we grow cucumbers, because we're having a real problem with the cucumber beetles scarring the cucumbers.
How
Yes?
do they get pollinated?
That's a good question. I don't remember talking about that. Did he put bumblebees in there? Yeah, I don't remember discussing that, but yeah, that's a good question. Well, no, actually, he's growing, what do you call it? Parthenocarpic? Is that the right term? Somebody tell me. That don't need pollination. Yeah, a lot of the greenhouse cucumber varieties, I think that's the way you say it, parthenocarpic, they don't need pollination. So anyway, just a method of trying to exclude the bugs. He said it was working very well, and he was pleased with his success there. From Jean Martin's place, we took a circuitous route down to Elliot Coleman's place. And Elliot Coleman is now 75 and can't imagine doing anything other than gardening. He's been doing it for, I think, about 45 years now, and is a master and just a wonderful man. Again, I don't have a lot of pictures of his place, but he was the inspiration for Jean Martin. Their methods are very similar, the 30-inch wide beds. The difference is Elliot Coleman, last I knew, was grossing about $140,000 off of his acre and a half, but he is doing it 10 months of the year. Jean Martin, I failed to mention, his marketing season starts in June and goes to November. So he's earning all his money. How many months is that? 5 or 6 months? So that makes it even more impressive. Elliot is largely turning over the day-to-day activities of his farm to apprentices, and basically gives them as much free rein as they want to take. And it was interesting. This year was a challenge for gardeners, I think, pretty much all over the eastern half of the U.S. Lots of rain, cool weather, and up in Maine, I talked to farmers. They said it was the worst season they'd had in 25 years. Consequently, with all that rain, it's very hard to stay on top of your cultivation. And you know, contrary to the pictures you see of Elliot Coleman's farm where you can't find a weed in sight, we actually spent quite a bit of time helping him weed some of his carrots because they were overrun with weeds. And you know, I know he has this no weed left behind philosophy, and so we're asking him, you know, how do you, this must be really hard for you to see. And you know, he said, well, the apprentices this year haven't been quite as diligent. I think that may have been the word he used, quite as diligent as they could have been to stay on top of the weeds. And my wife said, well, that must really be hard for you to see all this. And he said, no, actually, it's just, I just look at it as a new challenge for next year. How am I going to get rid of all these weeds next year? So rather than seeing it as an insurmountable obstacle, he's just saying, well, we're going to figure out how to get rid of all these next year. Anyway, one thing I wanted to just tell you about with Elliot's, you know, Elliot is an incredible, his mind is always going. So he and Jonathan get along well because they think alike, you know. you're on a conversation and they're way out there somewhere thinking about the next tool design. So he's constantly trying to figure out better ways to do things. And one of his big things, as I showed you, the Winter Harvest Handbook, he has, I don't know how to say it, but basically revolutionized small farming by showing that you can farm year-round in almost any part of the United States. And using very low, very inexpensive techniques. Here at Uchee Pines, you should have a thriving garden all winter long. There's no excuse. You know, he's in Maine, and he's doing it in Maine in unheated structures. And he'll tell you exactly how to do it in that book. But anyway, he's always, you know, he has really championed season extension structures. But the challenge is, you know, they're expensive. Although it's all relative. You know, we just put up a new hoop house that's 34 feet wide by 108 feet long. It was just under $8,000 for everything. Now, you know, you can say, well, that's expensive, but if you think of the growing space in there and the fact that you should be able to make at least $5 a square foot per year off of your hoop house space, you know, you should be able to pay off your hoop house plus earn, I mean, you know, we should be able to earn at least $15,000 off of that space in a year. So you've paid off your hoop house and gotten a return. You know, there's not many investments in this world that you can get that kind of return on. It's incredible opportunity. Anyway, you can't see these, so I don't want to talk about them too much, but basically he has come up with a new design of a portable hoop house. It's 14 feet wide and 16 feet long. It's kind of a modular thing. You can, you know, 2 or 3 people can pick it up and move it, and you can put them together and make it as long as you want. And the beauty of it is all locally available materials. It's chain link fence top rail, and then it's got rails on the bottom that have these, well, you can kind of see that. There's clamps that, they're called T-connectors, and the only other thing he uses is some electrical, EMT electrical conduit for bracing up on top. So it's all stuff he bent himself and hammered into shape. And he says that it, for the structure itself, not including the plastic, it's less than $1 a square foot. So that's pretty exciting. And I will tell you, the plan is for this design to go on the Johnny's Selected Seeds website. They're going to put the design on there and a materials list of what you need. And of course, they will sell things like the T-connectors and stuff, but if you don't want to go there, you should be able to find all the materials locally. So that's pretty exciting to have, you know, whether you're a home gardener or a market gardener, to have a hoop house for less than $1 a square foot.
HoopVendors.net has been working with Elliot Cohen and making a vendor, and they have the T-connectors available.
Okay, so that's the guy out of Texas, right? Yes, there's a guy out of Texas that designed the hoop bender that Johnny sells. Well, kind of. That's a different story. But anyway, for $59, you can buy the bender and bend all your own hoops.
Yeah, and for the benefit of newcomers, what's the difference between a hoop house and a greenhouse, please?
Okay, that's a good question, and there's no definitive answers. The terms are used kind of interchangeably. I'll tell you how we use them. A greenhouse is a heated structure, and because it's heated, you want at least, well, you want 2 layers of plastic with air inflation in between to give some insulation value. Of course, it could be glass or polycarbonate or something, but it's usually a little heavier duty, high-tech heated structure. A hoop house could be the same frame or maybe a little lighter duty frame with just a single layer of plastic. So I'll just tell you in a minute here, Elliott Coleman's technique is based on 2 layers of covering. 1 layer of plastic and then a low layer of row cover suspended just inches above your plants. With those 2 layers, you can keep plants alive. And well, let me just say his other technique is growing plants that love cold weather. That's the key. You're not trying to grow tomatoes and green beans. You're growing, and there's all kinds of plants that most of you have never heard of. Asian greens, European greens, you know, of course, all your root crops, so many things. I'm going to try to save questions till the end because I want to make sure I get through it. Yeah. Oh, it wasn't a question.
A friend of mine figured out to nail on the side of his barn. He took a string and made a circumference and made all these pieces of 2x4 and bent his hoop house, with that.
Okay. Yeah, if you're handy, you can probably come up with a jig that would work even cheaper than $59. Well, we're running out of time, and basically, we don't have time to get into all the techniques here, but the goal is to try to inspire you that you don't need a big farm in order to make farming work. And so I just want to run through this. Some of the benefits is less land. So it makes farming for a living a reachable goal for more people. You know, if you've been thinking, I've got to buy 20, 30 acres, of course, if you have the money, there are advantages to having a buffer, and it's nice to have some woods for firewood and all that. But if you can't afford that, you can make a living off an acre or 2. Less equipment needed. Again, that hurdle of, tractors and all this equipment now becomes much more reachable. And much of it can be done with hand tools. You don't even have to have a BCS. It's very helpful. Easier soil improvement and weed control. What I mean by that is that you now are concentrating your investment in soil improvement in a smaller area. You now can justify buying compost and building up an acre of land, whereas to try to do that to 5 acres is way out there. Weed control, there's something about having a well-defined space. I can conquer this in the strength of Jesus Christ, right? A building this size, I could keep that weeded. But when you go out and see 5 acres, it's a little overwhelming. Less overwhelming. So let me share some keys to success. Obviously, if you're growing that intensively, you've got to really focus on your soil. And this comes back to what Larry was talking about. It comes back to you know, really making sure the chemistry of your soil is well balanced, and then making sure you add lots of organic matter to keep that biology up. Efficient tools and techniques. You know, the key to market gardening is efficiency. We're still learning that. But it's exciting to see a lot of tools being developed specifically for the small farm. You have to maximize your space through intensive and succession planting. And what that means is you've got to have a high degree of planning and record keeping. And this is where some of these books, that book by Jean Martin, I can't wait for that to come out in English because I'm going to devour it. You know, he's got it all laid out. It's like The New Organic Grower that Elliot Coleman wrote, but that's 20 years old now. This is updated for the 21st century. Marketing, you know, again, you got to have a market. That is not as hard as it appears, but it still takes some effort. And, you know, we could spend a lot of time talking about each of these. I just want to mention, I've mentioned some of these, but some specialized tools, and I'm not suggesting you have to have all of these, but these can be helpful. Walking tractor, BCS with rototiller, flail mower, and rotary harrow attachments. Now I know I missed the discussion on rototillers, but I know there's a lot of pros and cons there. I will tell you, Elliot Coleman still uses a rototiller. The key is if you have enough organic matter in your soil, a rototiller is not going to destroy it. So my rule of thumb for people with rototillers is only use a rototiller if you're incorporating organic matter. If you're incorporating organic matter, I believe you're doing more good than harm with a rototiller. And there are times when you're preparing a fine seed bed for seeding carrots or something where you want to get it really fine. Flail mower and rotary harrow. A rotary harrow is I wish I had a picture of it. It's a tool that goes on the BCS with teeth like this that turn this way. So rather than turning this way, you're turning this way, and you're just stirring the surface of the soil. So if you put your compost on and you run over it with the rotary harrow, it just incorporates it, and you can adjust the depth, you know, 1 inch, 2, 3 inches, but just the small, you know, the top of the soil there. That's I'm seeing more and more people using those and really liking what they see. A broad fork. If you don't know what a broad fork is, every farm, every garden needs a broad fork. You can get them 30 inches wide, 24 inches wide, but it's a way to aerate your beds, and it's not hard work. Once you get it aerated the first time, which can be hard work, ever after that, you can use your broad fork on it. A 30-inch wide rake is very helpful, and Johnny's sells, actually all it is PEX pipe that you can put over the tines and mark your beds with it. Really handy, very efficient way to make a grid. You make a grid on your beds and then you plant on the grid, and you can change the spacing by putting the tubes on different tines of the rake. Just very simple but ingenious. A 6-row seeder. You know, one of the big money-making crops on most small farms is your salad mix kinds of things. And a 6-row seeder is designed to go down one side of the bed and back the other, so you actually have 12 rows to a bed. You can do a lot of your baby greens and stuff very intensively. And then, of course, we can't forget the quick-cut greens harvester for harvesting that. We have that right here. It's powered by a battery-powered drill, and you just go down the, well, I don't want to cut the cord here. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to it really. You just go along like this. You know, up until this, it was scissors and a knife. But Jean Martin told us that with this, it used to take 3 workers 2 hours to harvest his salad mix for market with scissors and knife. With this, it takes 1 worker 40 minutes. So it's a huge increase in efficiency. And again, that's what you're looking for. It's called a quick cut greens harvester. Yes. Yeah. That's Jonathan's contribution to the small farm movement. Cost is it's going up. Yeah. Yeah, John. I mean, he doesn't set the price; he sells it to Johnny's. It sounds like maybe it's going up. And the new catalog comes out in a few weeks. $5.25.
What is that website? Johnny's?
JohnnySeeds.com, I think. No apostrophe. Now, let me just finish here. Recommended resources, I'm pointing you here, bountifulblessingshared.com. That's our educational website, because on that site we've got a recommended resources handout, which gives you the contact information for Johnny's. It lists the books. I don't have this Jean Martin's book on there yet, but we will be updating that soon. Here's his, I'm pretty sure, I don't have good internet here, but I'm pretty sure this is his website. That's specifically for the book. Yeah, he has a French website, but this one is specifically for the new book, which I can recommend without reading, because I've seen this and I can tell it's good. And then Elliot Coleman does have a website. It's fun to see pictures of his farm. These are 2 of the leaders of the intensive farm movement. There are others, but we're out of time. So thank you for listening, and I hope that was encouraging.